welcome back to the Goot Reaction. I'm your host, Joe Goot, and I'm with my main man from the Midwest, and we're going to be doing a B.R.A.S.S episode today. What is a B.R.A.S.S episode, you might be wondering? Bunch of random ass stories. So that's what these are going to be. And this is episode 1 in the B.R.A.S.S series, and these will be just kind of interspersed here and there throughout our other topics, our other shows that we do. One of the main things that we wanted to talk about today was the debate, the vice presidential debate between Tim Walz and J.D. Vance, since that just happened last night. And so we're going to kick it off with that. I watched probably about 45 minutes of it, and then just while I was at work on a lunch break, and then caught a lot of other clips and tried to listen to some commentary. So to be fair, right up front, haven't seen the entire thing, so I don't have the full context of seeing all the interactions and how the moderators handle things. So I will say that up front. But I will say a couple things that stood out to me was that I didn't, again, see enough of it in its direct context live to say a winner one way or the other. I will say that it seemed like JD actually did a really good job and was very slick, very smooth. Maybe he didn't have as much substance as Governor Walz did, but his delivery, I think, was on point. He was able to pivot away from stuff that he didn't want to talk about. Classic, slimy, slick politician moves there. I think his time at Yale, his time as a lawyer, definitely contributed to him being just very comfortable on the stage. Plus, he's done a ton of interviews. He's had a lot of really difficult questions from reporters and TV show hosts and podcast hosts and stuff over the years. So I think, he's had his fair share of prep over the years really leading up to this. So I'm not giving him so much credit because he's just had the reps week in, week out. So, and I don't think Tim Walz is super comfortable on stage in that environment. I think just put him in a rally and he's great. I think he has no problem. He's very comfortable in his own skin. But from what I did see, especially towards the beginning of the debate, he just didn't seem super comfortable. And so that's where I was saying, I think just in terms of style, if you look at a style perspective, I would say JD took the W there. But from a substance perspective, I think that was Tim Walz all the way. And also just from telling the truth and actually sticking to facts, I think there was no question that Tim Walz had his troubling moments as well. The Tiananmen Square thing and the just did not go well. That was like super cringe. And I don't know the context. I didn't realize that he had said that earlier. And so when the debate moderator brought that up, I thought that was a little bit uncomfortable for him. But again, politicians lie. It's not anything new. And some do it more than others. So I'm not shocked that Governor Walz may have misspoke before and misstated something like that. So it's not a surprise, and it's not a deal breaker for me by any means, because the other side is just, they lie for a living. They lie when they breathe. So anyway, all that being said, just wanted to throw out my initial feelings there. I think overall Tim Walz did a great job. I think J.D. Vance accomplished what he wanted to accomplish, which was to appear normal and not super weird and crazy, which I think is a very well-deserved reputation that he has. So I think he overcame that hurdle and was able to be successful there. How much it actually matters, VP debate, I don't know, but I think both of them probably got accomplished what they wanted to accomplish. What do you think?
Yeah, first of all, I didn't see every minute of it. Saw a good chunk, and then I've listened to a few podcasts and stuff where other clips were played that I didn't see or didn't hear.
Mm-hmm.
I tend to agree with your overall assessment, but man, I have a hard time anymore. I mean, I know politicians lie, and I agree with what you just said about the abundance of lies, and I have a hard time saying somebody won or didn't win or performed well in a debate where a lot of what they said was not true. Because if that's where we're at, then let's just stop doing debates, right? Like, do it through your campaign, get your messaging out there. But for example, Vance gets up there and he says, "Hey, if we want to tackle climate change, we got to bring manufacturing back to the U.S., where we have the cleanest economy, which I don't think is 100% true. I'm sure there's a couple European countries that are probably doing a little bit better than us. We need to, if we're going to invest in green energy, then we have to make those things here. And Tim Walz is sitting there going, we do. We're making solar panels in Minnesota, where it's half of what the Investment Reduction Act, or I'm sorry, the Inflation Reduction Act was about. And to sit there and talk about those things like it's stuff we need to do and we're not doing, no, that's what is happening. There's a lot of movement in that direction. So it's just disingenuous to sit there and I don't care how smooth you say it. If you're not going to talk about reality, talk about the truth. I'm not going to sit here and give you a win on the debate. The losers of that debate then are us, the American people, who need to know what you're really about. And guess what, JD? We're finding out what you're really about on this trove of podcast clips that are coming out from you from the last several years. So yeah, I mean, I'm going to take the whole body of work in, as I'm making a decision.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a symptom of Trumping on the scene. I mean, you've seen the just truth go out the window, which is just, and it's very, referenced 1984. His social media platform is called Truth Social, which is anything but, is the exact opposite. It's just the Orwellian just twisting of language to, where we used to be one thing meant that, and then now that thing means the exact opposite thing in this strange, bizarre world that we're living in. So I agree. It is disappointing that truth definitely took a backseat in that debate. And of course, part of the rules were that there was no fact checking. And so who wanted that? Oh, it was obviously JD
And
and,
he was
and
quick to
their
call
team.
it out. He was quick to call it
Yeah.
out that one time they started to a little bit. He's, hey, come on, you said you weren't going to fact check.
Yeah, yeah. There's no whining in debates, JD. No whining in debates. So yeah, that was for sure a theme that truth and representing actual objective reality was going to take a back seat, which it unfortunately did. I think another thing that was interesting was when Tim Walz asked him point blank, did you think Trump won the 2020, or did he lose the 2020 election? And then JD started deflecting immediately. He's like, I'm looking to the future. And then as he was saying, I'm looking to the future, his spin was looking back at how the Biden administration handled interacting with social media companies to prevent misinformation, dangerous misinformation about COVID. So are you looking to the future, or are you relitigating the past once again in your stupid side spin matrix dodging bullets getting out of the way of a very difficult question that you can't answer? You can't answer it because if you say yes, he lost, then Trump's going to beat the living shit out of you and probably drop you from his ticket. And then if you say no, you look like a psycho who doesn't recognize reality. So there's no great way to answer that, which I get. But wow, I mean, he even managed to be a hypocrite in his non-answer to that question, and I love how Tim Walz got him in that little trap.
Yeah, so Tim wasn't necessarily the smoothest up there. And he admitted to that in part of the vetting process in one of those early
Mm-hmm.
interviews. He says, I'm not a good debater. And man, maybe that's okay. I still say that dude feels real to me.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I resonate in a lot of different ways with that guy. JD Vance, yeah, you might be from a small town Ohio. You might be, well, from Kentucky, or he originated in Kentucky, then ended up in small town Ohio, whatever. Went on to Yale. Uh, you don't look or act anything like what you claim to represent. And for a guy who's only been really in politics for less than 2 years, I mean, the Senate position was his first office he's ever held. That guy is sure a polished politician. And
Mm-hmm.
I know a lot of people who are going to end up voting for him who would tend to think that politicians aren't good people. But that guy is 100% politician, because he can get up there and try to put the right spin on everything. And he was gracious on stage when he reacted to the story where Tim Walz talked about his son witnessing the shooting at a volleyball at like a YMCA or a rec center or something like that. I mean, he was very sympathetic, and I appreciated their cordial congenialness. I don't know if that's the right word there. Congeniality on the stage with each other. But yeah, there was just something about Vance that doesn't sit very well with me. One other thing I thought about that debate, all the times they were agreeing, and it couldn't help but make me think, because I think we've talked about this on our own conversations before too, that both sides really do see a lot of the same problems. The difference just is how they think they're going to deal with it. And, one of the ones that jumped out to me, they were talking about abortion, and then Vance pivots to, well, we need better, policies to help families and stuff. And it's like, hey, you can have all the child care policies and everything you want, but that still doesn't mean somebody wants to carry their rapist's baby to term. And I don't believe for a second if the response to that would be, well, there's got to be exceptions for rape and incest. Well, that doesn't seem to be what's getting put into practice in a lot of these states. So until I see that actually happen anywhere, I don't believe that's what you stand for 1 second.
Right. Right. And it was also telling that he denied wanting a national abortion ban when he's on tape saying that's exactly what he wants. He's 100% pro-life on his website. He has said in an interview before that he believes and to prevent women from leaving states where they have outlawed it or severely restricted it, to prevent them from leaving that state and going to a more favorable state to receive care, that we need a national abortion ban. So again, just a huge lie on a very consequential issue. Now, that's not one of those just I'm slightly misrepresenting my position because it's just convenient or whatever. I mean, that's a huge one because both he and Trump know that is a political killer right there. Like, if they seem like they are going to try to lock down the entire country, that is going to slap them in the ass in the election. And women are not going to stand for that. And so they have to literally deny what they've said before and not just say, I misspoke or I've changed my mind, just completely pretend like it didn't happen, which is even worse because then you're still not denying it. You're just saying effectively that you never said that, which you did. And you guys are constantly bragging about how you got it overturned and, in the Supreme Court. And so it's very disingenuous and very telling that was the way he handled that in the debate.
Yeah, and even when they try to pivot to their better argument, right, that we turned it back to the states and the states can decide. Walz had the perfect response to that. You're saying that your human rights depends on your geography and where you live and whether or not you get to realize those rights or not. Yeah, I thought that was a great response from him.
Yep, definitely. Yeah, let's see. There was another one too where I think Waltz had a great line. I think it was around January 6th and the kind of just that whole situation and how it was. I don't remember the exact quote, but something along the lines of Mike Pence isn't on the stage here today because of that, because he did the right thing. And so that's why he's not here. That's why you're here. And so, and it just, again, in the context of how that was awful and we need to take that seriously and we need to remember. And then JD said something about, well, yeah, it was a perfectly peaceful transfer of power on January 20th.
Yeah, Trump left. Trump just left. Didn't welcome in the incoming president. Didn't do anything that's been tradition for 200 years plus. Just took off, right? It was peaceful because Trump threw a big hissy fit and flew away on his little plane.
I love that. Just completely ignoring the chaos and violence and death of January 6th and just saying, oh, yeah, it was eventually peaceful. Like, oh, my God. It's just, I can't with that anymore,
Don't forget that Tucker Carlson got a hold of like 60,000 hours or whatever it was of footage and showed 30 seconds of people walking peacefully down a hallway in the Capitol that day, and that just solves everything. That means there was nothing bad that happened. It's disregard what was in that other 59,500 hours of footage. It was all just peaceful.
Yeah, just tourists that went through the wrong door accidentally and
couldn't find the bathroom, so just had to shit on the walls, right?
Shit on the desk, yeah. Poor people, man. They're political prisoners down there. I wish someone would do something about that.
Yeah. And speaking of January 6th, so I was thinking about this earlier today too. Is it a, and maybe it's been talked about places. I don't recall really hearing anything about it, but is it sort of a ticking time bomb here that the person that will certify this election is one of the two candidates in the election, right? Because Kamala Harris is the sitting vice president.
Yeah,
So, I'm sure that's another whole point of, when I mean, assuming so if Harris would win, then she's going to be asked to certify that election. She'll have to stand there in Congress and face all the BS that I'm sure that's going to come her way. That's going to give Trump an extra uh, ammunition to try to argue to say there's something illegitimate about it. If he wins, yeah,
yeah,
I, if he wins, I have no doubt she will do her job accordingly.
right.
But if she wins, ooh, that's a whole nother level of stuff that I don't know if we were
Yeah.
thinking enough about.
Yeah. Didn't that happen already? So the last time that I can think that happened was George W. Bush or George H.W. Bush as VP for,
Well, yeah, it would have
and
been.
then he got elected in '89 or whatever. Then
But I
is
mean,
that
things were more normal then. I mean, everything was just
true? Yeah.
understood that everybody was just going to do their job and accept the results, and
Right.
for the
Yeah.
most, at least for the most part,
Yeah, I agree. I was just trying to think like
yeah,
when has that happened recently, and then in that case on the Republican side, but they're obviously these Republican parties are nothing alike. Um,
yeah, it has to have happened before because other VPs have. I mean, I don't know the full history offhand, but other
right.
VPs have run. But
Yeah.
so so certainly it's happened. The situation has happened, but not under these circumstances in these times, and with, like I said, Captain Hissyfoot over there ready to complain if things don't go his way.
Yeah, he's already. I mean, he's already lining up so many contingency plans and excuses, and he's already talking about the only way we'll lose, of course, is if they cheat again, and they're so good at cheating, and they're all evil, and they're all scumbags, and they're all vermin, and yeah. So he's definitely
Don't forget
he's
morons. They're
morons
morons
as
too,
well.
apparently.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And one of the latest ones is he was literally calling Kamala Harris like mentally impaired and then said that she was mentally disabled. And I'm like, are you, what? And I know other people have said this, but just, yeah, the level of vile discourse now that is just accepted. That I saw that on some independent media, some progressive bloggers and YouTubers and stuff talk about it. But has that been a big deal in the media at all? In the actual mainstream media? Like the fact that a major party candidate said that about his opponent, and where pre-Trump, that would have been like a career ender right there, or at least like been a major story. It would have been multiple news cycles and been a big embarrassment where you'd have to retract it, you'd have to apologize, you'd have to explain yourself for a few days, etc. And now it's nothing. It's just another stupid, vile bullshit thing that Trump says.
Well, like we were just saying a minute ago, though, part of that in the past would have been the party would have stood up and said, "No, you can't
Mm-hmm.
represent us that way." But now it's full embrace of the chaos.
Yeah, well,
You
because the
know?
party is Trump, and the Trump is the party, so
Yeah.
there's no separation there anymore. There's no there are no guardrails because they're all attached to his hip. And it's like it just is what it is.
Yeah, and they sit there and talk about how hungry the left is for power, but we don't we don't embrace, well, I'll put myself in that category.
Mm-hmm.
We don't embrace people like that just to be.
Right.
I mean, they'll try to make America think that we do by the way they'll talk about Biden and talk about Harris and talk about Walz. But I mean, I don't think we've ever had anybody even close. They've never even had anybody even close to,
Right.
to what Trump is.
Yeah. Well, and then you think about the whole weaponization of the DOJ and how the Justice Department and all the prosecutors are out there and they're rigged and they're out to get the Republicans, and yet we have Cuellar, we have Menendez, we have
Hunter Biden.
Hunter Biden, like all these. Democrats, all these people in those circles that it sounds like some of them have already, yes, been convicted and are going to be sentenced and or are in prison now. And it's like, yeah, I don't support those people. I'm glad if you commit crimes, if you abuse the public trust, you deserve to be punished for it. And so I'm glad that's happening. But then to still fly with that narrative that the Justice Department is purely against conservatives and they're being censored, they're being prosecuted, they're being harassed. I don't know. It seems like, again, those pesky facts kind of get in the way of that narrative.
Yeah, I heard the police are biased against speeders and bank robbers too.
Yeah, it's weird, man.
Forgot Andrew Cuomo in there too. I mean, I don't even remember if
Cuomo,
he actually
yeah.
broke any laws. He was just an asshole when we pushed him out.
Right. Oh, man. All right. Well, any other thoughts on the debate? We've got a couple other topics that were of interest to me this week, but any other debate related musings?
No, I think we covered the main ones I had
Okay.
kind of incorporated just in our whole discussion there.
All right.
So yeah, what else you got?
So we got two interesting ones here, both kind of science related this week. One is, in animals, do they have knowledge of death? Do they know they're going to die? Also, the wrapped up within that would be, do animals have some sort of consciousness? And then I'm going to just roll with that topic, and then I'll bring up the second topic if we still have time. So I'll go and do a couple notes that I had, and then we can discuss. If you have any thoughts, chime in whenever. But I'll start with so a lot of this stuff is from Wikipedia, taken from different sources, so I didn't cite every single individual subsource, but most of this I did some basic research on Wikipedia for this. But it's something that just popped into my head the other day, and I was thinking of it as I've heard from before, and I've actually kind of seen some evidence of crows sort of seemingly having funerals for their dead brethren. And so that got me thinking: are they actually aware of their own impending death? Is that something that is just a human thing because we have this unique consciousness? Or in the case of the funerals, are they mourning death? Are they aware of it? Or is it just that they're trying to educate each other about the dangers? They saw one of their comrades die, and so are they just trying to say, like, hey, they're getting together, they're talking, they're all gathering? Are they just sort of communicating what could have potentially led to that death, or what the danger is? If it is a danger thing that they're just trying to be aware of, then are they aware of danger equals death equals something I want to avoid? Or is it literally just like an instinctual thing to just try to stay alive? Like, is that just a basic instinct that all animals have, and it's not related to consciousness or an actual awareness of death, but just an instinct? So really quickly, before I get your thoughts on that, I just want to do a quick definition of consciousness. And I have an interesting quote about how can't really even define consciousness yet, or really know much about it. So it's kind of an interesting 1-2 punch here. But so consciousness is sometimes defined as the quality or state of being aware of an external object or something within oneself. It has been defined somewhat vaguely as subjectivity, awareness, sentience, the ability to experience or to feel, wakefulness, having a sense of selfhood, and the executive control system of the mind. So those are kind of the main components that a lot of scientists think of, neuroscientists and so forth, think about when they're discussing consciousness. One thing that I didn't see in that list, again from my reading on Wikipedia, was empathy or sympathy, so the ability to feel, to essentially put yourself in others' shoes, which I think is an important quality of consciousness. So not just being aware, not just looking in a mirror and recognizing yourself, but being able to project your feelings onto someone else and feeling those feelings from that other person. That's what I have there. Really quickly, I'll follow this up too. In 2004, there were 8 neuroscientists felt that it was too soon to actually try to define consciousness, and they said in a statement, quote, "We have no idea how consciousness emerges from the physical activity of the brain, and we do not know whether consciousness can emerge from non-biological systems such as computers. At this point, the reader will expect to find a careful and precise definition of consciousness. You will be disappointed. Consciousness has not yet become a scientific term that can be defined in this way. Currently, we all use the term consciousness in many different and often ambiguous ways. Precise definitions of different aspects of consciousness will emerge, but to make precise definitions at this stage is premature." So, that being said, we're going to still attempt to kind of pick it apart a little bit, and again, especially in the realm of thinking about animals, and do they have even something remotely similar to what human consciousness is?
That's a doozy, man. You drop all this stuff, and I'm still like thinking about the first sentence. No. Yeah. Okay. So a lot of stuff there. So I think I'm gonna go with. I think animals are aware of death. I don't know if it means the same thing to them
Mhm.
as it does to us necessarily, but I think they're
So
aware.
aware of their own death, their own coming death, or just aware of death in general?
I think they're aware of the idea that they could die, and I
Okay.
think about that from. Well, there's a few different angles. So if you've ever been around deer, or another weird example is groundhogs,
Hmm.
squirrels. If groundhog sees you and recognizes you as a human form, they bolt. Deer, the same thing. So they must they're aware. It would appear they're aware of some level of harm, and to
Hmm.
them, I don't think they're worried you're going to go up and punch them in the face, right? They relate. I think to they've seen. Hey, I've seen something that looks like that, and I've seen my friend die. You
Hmm.
know what I mean? There's something that drives that. Something that drives that fear. Another example I think of is I think I may not have this 100% right, but cats are supposedly scared of like cucumbers. You can put a cucumber next to a cat if they don't see it, and they'll see it and they'll jump. Um, I think they say that comes from an inherent fear of like snakes from back in their ancestral times, snakes being one of their main predators. So they learned to carry that fear. And if that snake had never harmed anybody, why would they carry around fear? And I just where
Right.
I'm going in my head is I don't know if they can disassociate just harm, like, oh, it bit me and it hurt, or from death. So there's something that drives that fear behavior. Now,
Hmm.
do they associate death with any sort of potential afterlife or anything that like some humans do? I don't know. Um, do they? When you first started talking about the crows, I was kind of like, well, they may recognize that my friend, that other crow, is no longer alive, so I'm going to miss him, but may not have the idea that, oh, well, that could happen to me someday too. But then I got to
Right.
thinking about it more, and I thought about like
Hmm.
deer and even most birds too. I mean, heck, a big old ugly buzzard in the middle of the road that's eating a dead animal will know enough to get out of the way when a car comes up on it. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? So there's at least there's some harm avoidance mechanism there, and if they didn't associate it to something really bad, I don't think they would react necessarily. But that's just off the top of my head as you
Sure,
as you
sure.
introduce that topic.
Yeah. Well, then to me, that gets to the question of what is instinct versus what is awareness of death. And I think that that's kind of the root of those examples that you gave, because I think I agree that that behavior is certainly, I've definitely seen that myself as well. And I just wonder then, is does that extend all the way to, oh my gosh, myself, my babies, my, whomever around me, they are also, we're all going to die. And so I'd like to try to avoid that. Or is it just literally some amygdala based instinct that says this type of shape or this type of organism is a predator, and I should keep my head on a swivel to avoid being eaten? And I don't know what being eaten means. It's just harming me and keeping me from reproducing again. And is that the root of it? So I don't, certainly we're not neuroscientists. We're not even these other neuroscientists say we're not going to get a precise definition of consciousness. So,
I'm
not
taking
that we're
night
going to answer that,
classes.
but
I'm taking night
yeah.
classes, but I'm not there yet to my
Okay, well,
neuroscience. No.
get back at me in 10 years when you're
Yeah.
when you
Yeah.
graduate.
Well, when you mentioned instinct there, so I think of like learned behavior, the idea that even now they're saying in humans you can carry past trauma from previous generations, which I think is kind of fascinating in a way that
Yeah.
explains a lot of things. But instinct, so, for example, house cats who come from a lineage of house cats have probably not been in danger of from snakes in a long time, right? So they may
Hmm.
have that, like you said, kind of an instinct or a learned behavior to react, but they might actually not know relating why I'm reacting to that,
Hmm.
right? So it's that learned behavior carried down, but not actually the underlying cause of why I'm reacting that way. It's an interesting
Right.
idea.
Right. Well, that's actually hinting at the second topic that I wanted to bring up. But I will add this as a potentially final cap to this first topic. But in 2012, a group of neuroscientists signed the Cambridge Declaration on Consciousness, which unequivocally asserted that humans are not unique in possessing the neurological substrates that generate consciousness. Non-human animals, including all mammals and birds, and many other creatures, including octopuses, also possess these neural substrates. Now, for me, that's super interesting. So they're saying, it sounds like what they're saying is the basic building blocks of consciousness are there in a lot of animals and birds and you know
I would believe like
other
dolphins and
fishes.
some of those things that they think are
Yeah,
super intelligent. Octopuses too,
yeah,
man.
wicked
Those
smart.
things are aliens.
Yeah, yeah. So it sounds like what they're saying is that those pieces are there because we recognize them also in the human brain. But my biggest question then to them would be, well, no one has really said like, okay, consciousness comes from here because that would be Nobel Prize times 10. But they're essentially saying that they've identified these neurological substrates that generate consciousness. Well, how can they do that and what are those exact substrates? So that's a little bit like it's interesting to me, and I think they could still be right and wrong at the same time. Like right in that you might say, okay, these are the same kind of chemical compounds and neurological structures, and we see them in human brains and we see them in all these other brains of animals as well. That can be true, but to say then those are where consciousness comes from, just from what I've read and heard, I don't think they can definitively say that yet. To me, that seems a little bit far fetched. But
Yeah, when you start to think about the brain and different animals, and because I think I've heard said about dolphins before that they may be more intelligent than people as a whole,
hmm,
but that they just don't have the same physical other tools, right? They don't have vocal cords that are, well, let me take that back. I think other things I've heard is they have actually a pretty extensive language they use
hmm.
with each other. We can't understand it, but they don't have arms and fingers and opposable thumbs to do things with like we've developed. So there's probably, again, this is just me spitballing here, but it seems like maybe there's a different, like all of the evolutionary things have to have occurred at the right time and the right pace. It's almost like the Fermi paradox in a way, thinking about like the idea of extraterrestrials and the fact that everything, I'll just say this, and I know you know, but for the audience, the Fermi paradox talks to the idea that over the vastness of space and time that two civilizations to make contact with each other would have had to be develop, form, develop technology, develop the means to communicate, all within the right time window to be able to communicate with each other across the vastness of space, and you factor light years and time into all that. So there might have been many other alien civilizations out there over the course of time that this, like, they could have fully developed and gone extinct before we even formed. right? So
Mm-hmm.
it's not that they necessarily just don't exist as a whole as they may have existed previously. There may be other alien life forms out there that are just in their amoeba stage that will be gone by the time they develop the technology that we could have talked to each other, right? So, but I've started to think about that just in the terms of evolution within animals on our planet. That yeah, maybe there is stuff out there. Maybe the octopus is vastly more intelligent than we are, but it's just the way it has evolved. It doesn't have a means to communicate that we can understand. Maybe they communicate just fine with each other, but
Mm-hmm.
there's parts of their brain that just says, "I'm happy living in the ocean catching fish." You know what I mean? Like they don't have a drive for other things, for kind of like we talked about in previous episodes, for like an identity or to set themselves apart from each other. Or so it's hard to hard to say. There could be all kinds of things going on in the brains of other creatures that we just can't tune into, can't, because we're just on different parts of the evolutionary scale at this point in time.
Yeah, no, I think that's a super interesting point, and I think that's one of when I did more reading on this, that was one of the big things is that they're saying there's as interesting as this topic is, there's really no way to verify it because we just can't communicate with these animals in that way that we could understand how they're feeling and what they're thinking and those aspects of their life. So it's an interesting problem to try to solve, but really we just don't have the ability to do it right now. And I also think that's super interesting to think about in 100,000 years, a million years, are octopuses going to be the dominant species and they'll maybe move to land and figure out a way to breathe on land and then take over take over our what was once our domain, and then dolphins might grow and evolve and change and they'll be the dominant creatures of the sea. And yeah, it's just super fascinating to think about how that could go and just given enough time where we could end up with those things. Super interesting.
Yeah, and octopuses, they'll learn to code, and with 8 arms, you have one octopus sitting there
Hell
working on
yeah, man.
8 different computers at a time, rewriting AI on on their behalf.
Unemployment will be through the roof. 8 to 1 ratio. We're screwed.
Yep.
All right. So the other topic I had was actually it's funny because it riffs off a couple examples that you gave, specifically one about generational trauma. And I was listening to the Star Talk episode. That's a show with Neil deGrasse Tyson, and he always has fascinating guests, and they're both funny and interesting. So I would highly recommend checking out his show. But they were talking about epigenetics with mice and them learning about pain and trauma and passing that on to offspring. And so the theory of intergenerational trauma suggests that trauma can be inherited through epigenetic changes, which essentially is that alters how genes function instead of damaging them. So epigenetic changes means your DNA will change, but it's not necessarily a damaging process. It's just an altering of how they function and what they do. And so the ideas with these experiments, this one doctor was doing was that they trained mice to fear a smell, and then they trained so that once they associated a smell with pain by giving them electric shocks while the smell was present, then they would breed the mice in different pairings, sometimes with two mice that had experienced the trauma. And again, we're talking kind of trauma in quotes. It's just a mild electrical shock on their feet in this little chamber that they hadn't been in before. And so they go in, they smell this smell for like 10 seconds or something, and then they get a shock. And then they would pair them in different mating pairs to see if one or both, let's say both had experienced the experiment, and then some pairings where it was just one mouse had and the other one hadn't. And so just to try to do all these different controls and variations on the experiment to see what epigenetic changes would be passed down. In I think all these cases, the offspring and even their grandpups had inherited this fear of the smell because the smell again associated with the pain. And then other versions of the experiment would where you would be stressing the mother mice and found that their pups exhibited behavioral and molecular changes that persisted up to 5 generations. And so what this gets to is generational trauma and just wondering about Is this now we're talking, seeing this evidence in mice, but there's a lot of people that talk about how this could be the same in humans too. And one of the most famous examples, I was looking at this science.org article, and they brought this up in the Star Talk piece as well. But one of the best known cases was the Dutch hunger winter, which was in the Netherlands in the closing months of World War II. And the children of women that were pregnant during the food shortages died earlier than peers born just before, and had higher rates of obesity, diabetes, and schizophrenia as well. So the trauma from the food shortage, from all the stress of World War II, and all that combined to impact the offspring of those women who had to go through that. So it's very interesting to me that it was just a super interesting topic. Not only the fact that there's the epigenetic changes, but then the implications of that being trauma that your parents or your grandparents experienced could be showing up in you today. And so I just thought that was super interesting.
Yeah, I've heard that on some just that idea on some different podcasts. You'll have to tell me later who that episode was on Star Talk. I'll have to check
Yeah.
it out. It's one of those
I'll
podcasts
put it in the show notes. So yeah, so
okay.
whoever wants to listen to it can go right to that
Yeah.
episode.
Yeah, good call. We're still getting used to this whole podcast thing, folks.
Yeah, we'll get there.
Yeah. But yeah, I think I can't remember who all I heard talk about it in the past, but yeah, you start to think about, well, different cultures or different groups of people within this country. And I think one topic that I think one of the podcasts got onto in the past was it's probably safe to say that if this is true, then there's a lot of people who are descendants of slaves who were brought over here. Very, very traumatic experience, obviously, stolen from your homeland and brought over here. And then now add in generations of potential abuse and, servitude here.
Mm-hmm.
And then that just ended 200 and, wait, 150, wait. Why can't I do my
180, I
math?
think.
100.
Yeah, 1864, 5, right around there. Yeah,
Yeah, so
65. Yeah,
yeah, okay, yeah, so
so
100, about 100.
160.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. That's not that long ago. When you consider that there might have been, well, okay, wait, so
5 generations maybe,
5 generations, but
give or
but
take.
I'm
Yeah.
right, but I'm thinking like for people whose a lineage of family whose slave experience started in, I don't know, as early as maybe the 1500s
Oh, right,
here. So let's go
right.
300 plus years of slavery to then only have 160 years of non-slavery. But let's be honest, the whole civil rights issues and
Yeah, Jim
what's
Crow
the
and
Jim Crow and
yeah,
what's the I can't think of the term for, there was that period after slavery where there was another
Reconstruction.
Reconstruction and
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I mean, it's safe to say that there's probably some, and I don't say that to denigrate anyone. I'm just saying, like, when people want to point to, like, oh, what's wrong with those people? You know what I mean? It's like,
Mm-hmm.
well, there's a lot of potential build up trauma and stuff
Mm-hmm.
and I remember hearing an episode one time with a anthropologist who said that was again hearing this secondhand, but he was basically saying, you think about cultures in other countries, other continents like Africa, and said a lot of times it's not a money based culture, right? So we look at them and we go, oh, those people, they're so poor, it's terrible, and they're going, back to the socialism communism idea, right? They're like, no, hey, I got everything I need here. I've got, that guy knows how to make shoes, and that guy knows how to make clothes, and some of us farm, and we have everything that we collectively need.
Mm-hmm.
But we look at them and go, oh, you don't have money, so you're poor. And that we could get into a whole topic of like the whole banana republics and things that happened in Central America and South America with people that went in and took over countries like that and, forced an economy on them and things like that. But the point of me bringing this up was it was such a cultural shift when we started bringing those slaves over to this country and forcing them now into this work. And that was, they weren't necessarily like a working from dawn till dusk culture because they had everything figured out the way they wanted to live. And it
Right.
wasn't to be, you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
it's, I
Such a
mean,
shock. Yeah.
yeah,
In many ways. Yeah. In
yeah,
many different ways.
yeah. So I'm probably spiraled a little bit on that, but my point is like, it's very believable to think that people who suffered a large amount of trauma, heck, you hear about it with, like my grandma went through the Great Depression.
Mm-hmm.
She carried a lot of that. I mean, that was just within herself, not necessarily passed on to generations, but she went through her whole life. And I know sometimes I get accused of being a little bit of a hoarder. I never want to throw anything away if I think there's some use I can use it for. But then I go, hey, I probably came by that pretty naturally because my grandma was the same way, but she was
Yeah.
a victim of the depression.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's an interesting
Yeah,
topic.
because you think, okay, there's two layers to it, right? Because there's the layer, like the example you just gave with your grandmother. There's the behavioral layer that you saw and you experienced, and then there's the genetic layer which you don't see, but is maybe predisposing you to some of those things anyway. And then so you combine them, and you get the nature and nurture, and then it reinforces that to an even better or higher degree potentially.
Yeah. Yeah. There was an interesting, so this is a little off, not off topic, but it made me think there was a good podcast. I think Tim Miller mentioned it on the Bulwark, but Kamala Harris just appeared on the All the Smoke podcast, which is
Mm.
two former NBA players. So as much as they're always encouraging her to get out and, do some other media, so she does this All the Smoke podcast, and they got onto the subject of HBCUs and why they're so important. And this was Kamala saying, oh, yeah, these historically, even people who graduated from HBCUs didn't get the same starting point as necessarily someone who went to Harvard or, even maybe like you name it, Nebraska or Michigan or something, because of the places that they were coming from,
Mm.
where they would often start at a lower income point and then have to maybe taking care of parents, maybe taking care of younger siblings. So their money's going different places right off the bat, and just kind of that spiraling just harder getting off the ground. So you got a degree,
Mm.
but it's
Mm.
not the same as potentially the starting point that some other people have. And I think about that. So maybe that's not so much a trauma, but it's a result of a lot of those things that came before.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And so that's turning into their lived experience now. So it was a real
Yeah.
interesting conversation to hear her take on that. It was really good. I'd recommend it to anybody.
Nice.
Really good conversation.
Cool. Well, right on. So I guess we're good to wrap up now. I think we're through those two topics there. Anything you want to finish with, or should we call it good?
Yeah, I think we're good.
All right. Right on. Well, everyone, as usual, thanks for joining us again through the topsy-turvy world of our first B.R.A.S.S episode, and we hope you tune in next time. See you later.